School. Now, after a month of online learning, K to 9th grade students are heading back to class today. The COVID precautions are a little stricter this time around. In grades 4 to 9, masks are now mandatory for the full day. For younger students, they're recommended whenever possible. And teachers will wear a triple layer masks with eye protection as well. But is it enough? Dean Ingram is the president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Teachers Association, and he joins us on the line now. Good morning.
And good morning, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Now, how satisfied are your members with the new measures in place in schools?
Well, we've seen increased safety protocols in schools, mandatory masks for students, as you referenced, from grades 4 to 12, addressing physical distancing in high schools. Those are positive steps. Yet, we still have concerns about cohorting. Cohorting, as is described as, I believe, public health envisions it, we don't see it as being an effective safety measure, or certainly not a substitute for physical distancing for our K-9 students and the staff who work with them. Fundamentally, we'd like to see evidence of public health officials actually doing an assessment of the physical distancing that occurs in our schools. What are the cohorting realities for our primary elementary schools and for our junior high schools?
And so has that been done at all, or has that been communicated to the district?
Well, in terms of what information the district has received, I wouldn't be aware of that, but I do know that we haven't seen the evidence. We know that maintaining cohorting, it's challenging at the very best of times. And it's not realistic to assume children are keeping to their classroom cohorts outside of instructional time. In many, many schools, student cohorting cannot be maintained consistently. Staff regularly move between student groupings, and there are continued challenges with respect to lack of physical distancing and poor ventilation. We do have questions, as I referenced a few seconds ago, about what information some decisions are being based on. Fundamentally, have our public health officials actually sought to observe and understand what a typical day is like for our crowded K-6 schools, our crowded junior highs, 7 to 9s, with class size which often are greater than 25? Have they looked into the close context, the mass compliance of students on our school bus during the lunch periods after school? During yesterday's media briefing, just to illustrate this, Dr. Fitzgerald, I want to stress, I believe the province is in a very good place collectively, but as we've seen, it's very fragile. But in yesterday's briefing, Dr. Fitzgerald stated that students eat lunch in their cohorts. Now, I can't speak as to why she would have that understanding, but that's not the reality in all schools, and particularly not so in those junior high schools where students often leave the school during the lunch period.
Besides the cohort issue, what else needs to be in place for students and teachers to go to school safety in your eyes?
Well, we've been maintaining that since the summer, that we hear every single day the mantra of people, space, time, and place. Everything that can be done possible to ensure our schools have the same safety protocols and are able to follow the same public health guidance is in effect for other public and community spaces. Dr. Fitzgerald has said where you can't maintain the 2 meters of distancing, where you can't maintain the core, that's a problem. When you hear the mantra of people, space, time, and place, the question I would ask is that how is that applicable to our schools? Teachers want students to be in the building. Teachers want to be in the building. There's no substitute. However, safety has to come first. I would like to see the mask requirements extend a little further. I would like to see steps measured to increase the physical distancing between students during the day. I would like to see an examination of how well what it seems like cohort is basing their guidance on, that it's safe, explicitly on cohorting, and we still question how it's been determined that this is an effective substitute for physical distancing.
How would the space situation work, considering that I'm assuming, and I haven't been in a school lately, what does that look like? Is there capacity to have that space that you're talking about, that further distance outside the cohort?
It'll be undoubtedly challenging without question, but again, what Dr. Fitzgerald says, if you can't maintain the 2 meters of distancing, if you can't maintain your tight 10, these are things that we need to look at and address.
And how would you address that then?
I think one number is the reducing the number of students. We've said class size has been an issue long before COVID. This is something that needs to be examined. We need to have a review of our supports and resource and class size issues within our schools for a number of years. But I think that has to be a step. How do we reduce the number of students in a number of these classes to allow for a greater degree of physical distancing within our students? Now, we have had a commitment from all the parties during this election that they will do that independent review, which is sorely needed and long overdue, but these are the things we need to look at. How do we maintain greater physical distancing between students? How do we ensure better sanitation? How do we improve ventilation procedures? These are the things we need to look at.
Okay, so I just want to focus on this the class size piece here. Are you suggesting that we have some students remain online and then some in school, alternating? What's the solution there for figuring out the class sizes right now with the capacity in mind of the schools?
Well, I think right now, if you look at online, what we've consistently called for is the same level of protection for students and teachers that are expected for other community interactions. When you strengthen protection for students and staff, and by extension our families, to move in-person schooling, we need to be safe and same for all of them. That has to be our focus. The in-class instruction needs to be the goal, but only when it's safe to do so. Does public health officials really understand the day-to-day reality for our teachers when we have crowded classrooms, class size 25 plus? One of the first steps is reducing that there. Online for everyone, well, again, there are challenges, but if you can't maintain the physical distancing as recommended, as that's crucial from Dr. Fitzgerald, if the cohorting principle doesn't work in some of our schools because of the dynamics of the way that school functions, I think there needs to be an examination of is online something that we need to look at for grades outside of 10 and 12. If you can't maintain the measures that are required and recommended, you need to look at a different mode of actually delivering instruction, one that's safe.
Okay. Now, I want to shift the gear to high school students right now. Those students are going to continue learning online. How is that going for high school teachers right now?
Well, we were pleased to see continuing and returning Scenario 3 online learning protocols for high schools to address the physical distancing challenge, which we just spent a few minutes talking about. We don't want students to lose instructional time. We don't want students to fall behind their peers in other parts of the country, especially when they're going to be seeking post-secondary education, scholarship opportunities. I have had outreach during the blended model, the Scenario 2, that was creating concern with curriculum coverage. Now, there are some subject areas that the online doesn't work as well for. There are undoubtedly challenges for those all students when they engage in online learning. And I say this because for 10 years I was an online educator before assuming my presidency, and I'll be returning to that in the fall. Providing additional supports for those students that may be struggling with this, we're pleased. We heard last week about the additional term substitute positions, supports that would be there to provide supports for those students that are struggling with the online model. And we do look forward to discussing with the department and the school districts on how those resources are going to be applied, are going to be used in the circumstances.
Now, we heard from Dr. Proton Raman yesterday about the prevalence of the COVID virus variants, and we know that we're in a very different situation than we were a few months ago now that the variants are in the mix. Do you think that there's a potential to get through the school year without a major disruption in the coming months?
I certainly hope so. I think that's mirroring a comment you'd hear from anyone. But I think all these things regarding the variant, regarding some of the changing dynamics, the clear illustration that while the province has been in a good place is extraordinarily fragile, it certainly speaks to the reason why teachers need to be vaccinated. I'm very glad to see phase 2 proceeding, but teachers need to be vaccinated, and my indications are that they indeed will be included in phase 2. Teachers need to be included as quick as they can, recognizing the priority of other groups. Our teachers interact, our education workers interact with a wide swath of people outside their bubble, outside their tight tent. I know there were more than 12 teachers that were diagnosed as being positive. I know a number of those individuals had to receive medical attention. I spoke with one of those individuals as recently as yesterday who's still feeling the after effects and is very anxious about how this will affect her long term. For these reasons, we need to have our teachers vaccinated. They are, in the context of their jobs, our education workers, in the context of their jobs, are exposed to individuals outside of their bubbles, outside their tight tent. Individuals that fit that criteria need to be vaccinated for the protection of themselves, for the protection of their families, and for the maintenance of the education system.
Dean Ingram, I want to thank you for your time this morning.
Kindly welcome.
Dean Ingram is the president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Teachers Association.